Hello, everybody, and thanks for listening. So, this article not too long ago it came out, and I was reading it, and it's not that lengthy, but I disagree with the article, and I'm going to tell you why. Because I know some things about this, I know quite a bit of things about this, because I'm number one, I'm African American, and this article, anybody who is either if you're Hispanic or African American, you might want to look at this and you can see in this article that I don't know where this is coming from, but it's I feel there's more at work here other than what the article is letting people see the reality of what the situation that is still persistent in America. And the article is entitled Why Home Ownership Rates Among Hispanics, African Americans Differ Substantially. And so this article is by Julia Limitoni. Okay, so this came out today and it's out of the Fox business. Now, when I see things like this, it what it says to me, it's race based and it it pits one group of people against another group of people automatically. And if you read the article, which I'm about to do, you see how this article is set up to pretty much make one group feel that they're achieving something and another one isn't achieving something. And it doesn't tell you all of the underlying details of why the other group isn't quite yet able to achieve the same level of um, home ownership as another group. And so I just want to say before I read this article, we have had discussions, or there have been discussions, like roundtable discussions about the wealth gap or the wage gap or the the incomes of black people versus Hispanics and whites. And so this article does not even make mention of all of that. Also, the long history of practices that have been done to black people to keep them virtually out of the housing market. That haunting practice, even though redlining was supposed to be done away with, there's supposed to be more opportunities for people that are black to be able to become homeowners. That still, that horrible legacy of redlining, the what do you say, the ghost still remains. And so, even though you tell people that this practice is no longer supposed to happen, it's eradicated, it's outlawed, that doesn't mean people are going to follow everything by the law. They're going to find ways to still discriminate people, even if there isn't supposed to be any redlining. And sometimes they don't have to use too much of that. You see that some people will live a segregated life, and the way things are going now, I have done articles where there are people that live in low income communities that are renters, where they are raising the rents and they're causing people to have to move and move further away. So they're discouraging a lot of people from even renting in certain neighborhoods. So, why would you put an article out celebrating one group's success over versus another? It sounds to me like there's an underlying motive here, and not all is being really discussed. And so this article, it basically, when I was reading it, it was talking about. I left my comment, and I'm going to go back to the article. And so I was looking at it. I think I was looking in the the business portion of it. And so I'm going to see if I can go back to it. And so it's just sad because when I was looking at this article, I thought to myself, I said, I don't really believe that they're being completely truthful about all of the things that are really going on. Trying to see if I can reach this again, and I'm not sure that I can. But basically, the article, I felt like it left out a lot of important information. Now, these are comments that were made by people, which I felt like the comments were were really race based, and were really, let's just be honest, they were really racial overtones. It was really discriminatory. It was, we're making reference that Hispanics work harder than blacks, and that they pay their taxes, and that African Americans, for example, this person, my thought is Hispanics work, pay taxes, and property taxes. African Americans like welfare, food stamps, Section 8 housing, seem allergic to work and won't pay taxes. And now, which group will buy houses? No need to buy a house if the government will rent one to you to tear it up. Their tear up is there. So it just seems as though that the comments that are coming out, because of the way the article was written, are extremely, really racist. And it pits people against one another. And I believe that's where the fights come, where you have one group that is pretty much put against another group to fight over nothing. And when you really look at the housing market, you see that if you're in Los Angeles, and I'm just going to take Los Angeles for example, what I've experienced is that a lot of the pockets of areas, steering still goes on. And what steering is, for example, say for example, if there's a neighborhood and it's predominantly African American, they may try to steer a white family away from that neighborhood. Even though there's supposedly no more redlining supposed to be practiced in law, it says no redlining, no discriminating people on where they're to live. If that person can buy a house and they're not black, the realtors will encourage them to live in areas where, for particular reasons, based on what they can afford. That's number one. And if they're able to afford a better home in a better environment, quote unquote, or neighborhood, they will steer them away from the neighborhood that is predominantly black or African American. And the practice of redlining still happens. That's what this article fails to reveal. And the same happens where they try to, now what they're trying to do is all of the home buying opportunities are pretty much encouraged to people that are in the Latin communities. And a lot of that is because of the fact that, number one, they would assume that most of them that they're doing this to are closer to Caucasian, or they're not claiming black. Um, they're bigger families and everybody is working, and they encourage the families to move into these homes because of what climate we're living in with the immigration issues and Donald Trump and him talking about closing borders and ending sanctuary cities. And so if you read about the history of um, Indians, how they discriminated and killed and murdered and slaughtered and stole land from them, and pretty much virtually they used every penny of the dollar that they had to try to hire, maybe, I don't know if they had lawyers back then. I'm assuming they had people to try to represent them so that they can get their land back. But once they had no money and they exhausted all their funds, they pretty much lost their land and lost their court battles. And so I don't know if anybody is familiar with that, but they've done a lot to decimate people who are Native American, to basically remove them from having any property ownership. And so there's this rush that is happening now for people to buy these homes, and they're encouraging Latin families to buy the homes. It's sort of like, how would you say, um, a backlash, but only in a way that they're utilizing it to try to own property and push out African Americans. And it's not the families doing it, it's the housing market people who are running it that are doing the same practices, but they're pitting one group against another in a way economically. And it's the same thing going on with the rental market. And so I paid close attention to this. If you don't have enough money, they're pricing you out of the neighborhoods. So the same practices are happening based on your economics, based on your race, based on also who you're with in your family. What is your family makeup? And so think about it. Has anyone stopped to question the realtors that, you could deal with any type of realtor? Do you know their personal preferences? Do they have biases? Or are they just in it for business purposes only intended, and they're not taking it personal? Most of the realtors that I have run into, if they're Hispanic, they usually seem like they're friendly on the surface, but what ends up happening is they talk to you, they build your hopes up and trying to get into a home, and then you get let down and you virtually don't get any response that's positive. But what ends up happening, you have to keep finding other realtors, other lenders who will work with you, who are not going to put their feelings in it and make it a personal vendetta as to try to discriminate or discourage you basically from the home buying process. And so that's what I've experienced personally. I feel like there's a racket going on that still persists and it's prevalent, especially in Los Angeles. I can say that for the most part. And so I feel like what I've seen, there's a house not far from where I'm at now. It was pending. It was a two-bedroom, one bathroom home. And I think, I won't even say what price it was, but it was pending. Every family that I've seen go to the house that they show the house to is Hispanic. But when any Black person calls to inquire about the house, oh, the house is already pending. That house has not been sold. It has not been sold to any one of those families that are Hispanic. And there's a reason. Either their credit is not good, or they're not able to come up with the money, um, or there's something that is stopping them that they can't continue the home buying process. But when a Black person calls and inquires about that home, you're given all kinds of excuses as to why that home is pending or somebody's looking at it. I feel that the same practices are still prevalent in these cities. They don't call it redlining, but it's either they're discouraging you or they're hearing your voice, They learn of what your ethnic background and makeup is, and then they discourage you from even trying to apply to get that home. And I'm saying this to you because I don't know if anybody has had this experience, but I have personally had this experience, and I know that this is going on. And so people are not telling the truth about this. They're not being honest that these practices are still prevalent in the home buying process. Just look at the comments that are here. Come on, everyone knows what the answer is. My thoughts are Hispanics work and pay their taxes and property taxes. Pretty much they're putting one group against another, and that's where the racism and fights come in at. It's the system that's set up puts these types of divisions between groups. And so articles like this, just look at how the article is set up. It shows you that they're basically trying to make what they're trying to do is they're trying to show you a comparison versus one group over another as to why one is successful and the other isn't. So let me read this article. While Hispanic home ownership is booming, now let me read it so you can hear how it sounds. Black home ownership is at its lowest rate on record, according to the census data. The National Association of Home Builders CEO Jerry Howard joined Fox Business on Tuesday to discuss how Hispanic buyers are moving the market. So basically, when you hear that opening, while Hispanic home ownership is booming, Black home ownership is at its lowest rate on the record, according to the census data. Just that one sentence right there, it sounds extremely negative when it comes to African Americans. It gets worse. So it's really interesting, he told Stuart Varney. Hispanics really only make up about 18% of the population, yet they're 63% of all of the new home buyers since recession ended in the last 10 years. It's amazing. Oh, really? Now, you remember what I just told you that the same practices that were haunting, that are still haunting and prevalent in the housing market still remain. The redlining, the discriminating blacks from getting loans to buy homes and to get into home ownership to build wealth. Because what does homes do? Help to build wealth and help secure your family's future. And that's been a long practice that they've tried to do everything in their power. They, as in whoever the realtors, whoever the people that are part of the home buying market, that are all involved and in cahoots with discriminating African Americans and discouraging them from becoming homeowners. That's who I'm referring to. So it says Hispanics, they really only make up 18% of the total population, yet there's 63% of all the new home buyers since the recession ended in the last 10 years. It's amazing. Howard said Hispanic ownership is up because they have, now listen to this, they have more money, they are more educated, and they are using cash to pay for homes. And what we are doing is we've been studying it a little bit. And what we think we see is a lot of Caucasian America, Hispanic incomes has risen significantly since the recession. Also, we have seen an increase in education levels among Hispanics. And thirdly, for some of the newly arriving Hispanics, let me stress that, they are they're used to paying things in cash for big purchases. That helps them avoid the complexities of the mortgage system, he explained. Now, when I have gone through home buyers classes, they want you to account for all of where your cash earnings come from. And you cannot just come up with random cash with no explanation as to where the cash comes from. So you have to have something that shows that you have earned it from a job, and you have to have it in an account so that they can access that money and be able to use it towards your home purchase or whatever it is that they're compiling together. Now, what I've learned too is that some people have said it's not only Hispanics that will use cash, but Asian people who are really wealthy will use cash to buy homes. And that's normally a practice that I've heard most of wealthy Asians or Asians that have money will use. That's what I've heard. I'm just saying that. And so I have not, however, I have not heard of Hispanics having large amounts of cash and paying on houses with large amount of cash. A lot of times I've heard of maybe the them doing things where they have like a bank account and they have a job, even if it's in landscaping. Their money is in an account, and they're not just handing out large wads of money. So I think this whoever wrote this article, I don't know where they're getting their information, but I have not seen it like that. It's usually people who are a lot wealthier that come up with all this cash. It tends to be, from what I've even heard from some Hispanic people, said that Asians will buy up a lot of the homes and property, but they're being discouraged because of some other things, some complexities that are happening with our government. And um, where their money is coming from, having to do with foreign currencies and whatnot. And so that's what I know that I've heard for the more recent part of it. So it goes on in the article. So the article is short, it's about to end. So it says, and while Hispanics seem to be reaping the benefits of the economy, Howard said, African American home ownership and housing in general seems to be still repressed. But there's no explanation as to why. You notice that? So they are not seeing the same increases in either education or income. This is a trope. They, as in these people that write these articles, will always want you to see blacks as uneducated, poor, and basically defeated and dominated by other races that aren't black or don't perceive themselves as black. And so that is where I feel that that's where that's coming from. So it says Howard said this. So African American home ownership and housing in general seem to be still repressed. And he doesn't give any other explanation. It's just repressed for some reason. They are not seeing the same increases in either education or income. Moreover, those African Americans who are homeowners are among the only ones are not seeing an increase or as high an increase in their house values, he said. Why is that? Because there's still redlining practices going on in these cities. They're still discouraging people and steering people who aren't black from buying homes around other blacks, and they're not putting money in those communities. If you've seen what has happened in some of the neighborhoods in Los Angeles, there are businesses that have closed down, literally closed down, because they could not stay open because money was not being allocated in the community enough to where the businesses could stay afloat. And so I believe that, if you have a community that is dying, they're not putting any money in and investing any money in that community simply because of the person's or the people's race and background, because they are discriminating them, then yes, the values of their homes probably will go down. And home buying is not going to be a thing that Black people are going to be looking towards doing if they're going to be discouraged when they do get into a home because they're in a neighborhood that is not having any money put in the community. And look what happened in Compton. They weren't they weren't fixing the potholes in the streets. And people who were like people who grew up in the neighborhood were trying to put money into a city where even the people who were on the board of council couldn't even get along. And so when you see things like that and you see articles like this, they're not being honest. And it's frustrating because people will read these articles and they'll throw one group against another group to battle for the bottom. But in true, all actual fact, the neighborhoods in Los Angeles are very concentrated with not only Black, but also with Hispanic people. We live side by side. When you see homeless people in Los Angeles, you see not only Blacks, you'll see Hispanics as well. When you see African Americans that are going to school, you'll see Hispanics going to school right alongside of them. So Blacks are getting educated. They have money, but a lot of times it's not enough money to make ends meet. And there are Hispanics that go through the same exact issues. They're not being forthright and honest in this article, is what I'm putting out. These are not factual facts. These are not true. They've cherry picked these situations to make it look like one group is catapulted over another. And that's where these fights and divisions come in. And they try to stir up controversy between one oppressed group versus another. And that's pretty much what I'm saying. So it makes it unfair to try to put labels on a group to say Blacks are not educated and they're repressed, and the ones that are homeowners are not seeing much value in their homes without giving a real definitive explanation as to why. And why it's happening is because they're not putting money in the communities, they're discriminating, they're still steering people, and the same old practices that were used once before are still being used. They're just savvy about saying things and they're good about wording things. They might have taken out certain jargon, or they might have made things look dressed up, but it's the same discrimination. Virtually the same stuff still applies. You just got new people doing it. That's all it is. So this is not true. But anyway, with that being said, I wanted to clarify that because now that the article is up, I wanted to talk about that for the longest, and I feel that this was the best article to relay that information. I'm kind of in one sense not happy about this article, and the other happy enough to explain the version that I know that's to be the truest of what's going on. Because even in Los Angeles County, you see downtown LA is full of homeless people and rats, and if you look at all of the downtown homeless people, they come from all walks of life. You see a lot of Blacks, but you see a lot of whites, you see a lot of Hispanics as well. You see people who somehow, if it was drugs or mental illness, they just weren't able to make enough money to make the rent. And so we've had rent control issues in most of these major cities. And if you, no matter what color you are, if you're not able to pay the rent, you can get kicked out of your home and have to look for a cheaper place to live, or you could end up homeless. You might be one paycheck away from being outdoors. And you can be in your home for 30 years, 2 or 3 decades, but if your landlord has a niece they want to move in the property, they can kick you out so that they can get higher rent or either move their relative in, because renters don't have any rights anymore. So they're not only targeting just African Americans, they're targeting African Americans, they're targeting poor people, they're targeting people who can afford to pay those high ass rents that are insanely too high, that don't make much sense, because by the time you get through paying the rent, you might as well have a house because the rent is too freaking high. It costs more to live in an apartment than it does paying a mortgage note. And that is the truth. That's what's going on. They're not being honest. And guess where this article comes from? Fox Business. And we know how Fox is. With that being said, I'm going to let this article go. What are your thoughts? Because I just think that they put people against each other to battle each other for nothing but kibbles and bits at the bottom. It really makes no sense whatsoever. So, with that being said, I'm going to let this video go. Like, comment, subscribe, and thank you for listening.